All right, good morning. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I want to start off by giving away something for free today. Everybody likes free things, and no, it's not Bitcoin. It will be a Bitcoin magazine, which is just as good. In some ways, it might be better than Bitcoin because the issue number 1 is going for about 700 to 800 euros on eBay. Now, I don't have issue number 1, but that's just a benchmark. I also want to ask a question. How many people in the audience, I know you raised your hand for knowing about Bitcoin, but how many people actually have a Bitcoin wallet? Okay, so that's fairly good. I usually say that if more than 10% of the people at a conference already understand Bitcoin, then I'm at the wrong conference. But at least this gives me a good overview and a good idea. So just shout out the answer to the question. It's not going to be anything polite where you have to raise your hand. Your neighbor will vouch if you were telling the truth or not. So sometime in the future, there will be the last Bitcoin that's mined. Can anyone say what year that will be? Yeah. Okay, so no one has the year for that. No? Okay, the answer was 2140. So in the year 2140, the last Bitcoin will be issued. I'll try another one. Okay, so regular currency has 2 spaces to the right of the decimal point for the most part. How many spaces are to the right of the decimal point for Bitcoin? 8. Who said 8? All right, well, congratulations, you get 1 magazine. All right, and let me try to give 1 more away. Okay, what is the name of the anonymous creator of Bitcoin? Who said Satoshi Nakamoto first? Somebody said Nakamoto. Who said Nakamoto? Okay, all right. Satoshi is only half of it. All right, thank you. All right, that's always fun to do. Okay. All right, so Bitcoin has a great story behind it. It's not just about the fact that there's a finite supply of 21 million. It's not just about the fact that you can send value to anyone in the world without asking for permission on destination or amount or time of day. Bitcoin is a very personal story, and it's been a very personal story for me. It has literally changed my life around. So I am 100% thinking, sleeping, dreaming, working about Bitcoin. And I want to share with you how it will change your life as well. So what the hell is Stone Money doing in an electronic currency discussion about Bitcoin? Well, it turns out that giant stone money of Yap, these large limestones that were quarried, actually have a lot in common with Bitcoin. And what they have in common is that they're based on a public mutual consensus of what is real or perceived to be real. Yap is an island in the Pacific, and these stones were used to designate the wealth among certain tribes and the tribal chiefs. So the oral history of that was passed on. They would die, but the wealth would still be there in the oral history and passed on to the other people in the tribe. The reason they have holes in the middle is that they were transported with long poles when they wanted to move them. So they had various sizes. They don't move them anymore. They just leave them in the town square like a public ledger for everyone to see, and everyone knows what they represent. There's a funny story about when they were transporting one of these in an outrigger canoe. it fell to the bottom of the ocean. Nobody really cared. They didn't try to go down and get it. They all knew what it said, and there it sits on the bottom of the ocean representing value for someone. And that's very similar to the Bitcoin blockchain, because nobody ever really sends or receives Bitcoin. I don't take it out of my wallet and send it to you. What you're really doing is just transferring your ownership on a giant public ledger. The giant public ledger happens to be distributed in the cloud. And when I send someone Bitcoin, I'm transferring my part to their part within that giant public ledger. And that giant public ledger has to be secured somehow. And it's secured by the processing power of all of the active nodes on the Bitcoin network. And that brings us to the next part of the story, which is the search for extraterrestrials. Why do we care about aliens when we're talking about Bitcoin? Well, it turns out that this used to be the largest distributed computing project in the world. Dormant cycles at universities would be, quote unquote, donated to the larger effort to search for extraterrestrials. This part here in purple is the part of the galaxy that they've so far scanned looking for radio signals or some sign of life. Well, sometime in the middle of last year, Bitcoin surpassed the SETI project, and Bitcoin is now the world's largest distributed computing project, proving that searching and securing for our money is more important than searching for aliens. This represents the computational power of the Bitcoin network. It's been on a very upward trajectory. The y-axis is terahashes per second. So this is measuring the combined computational power of the entire Bitcoin network. So all the distributed nodes around the world that are permanently or semi-permanently hooked up to the Bitcoin network. One of the reasons that it's growing so fast exponentially is that customized hardware is now being made to do the process of securing the transactions and securing the blockchain. It's known as ASICs. They're application-specific integrated circuits. And they're optimized to do one thing and do one thing only, and that's to mine for Bitcoin. Let me go back to this for a second. The power of this network is actually stronger than the top 500 supercomputers in the world combined. So when people say, well, why can't the governments just crack Bitcoin? Why can't they stop it? Why can't they put it out of business? When are they going to ban it? You know, they can ban merchants and they can ban your public use of it probably in certain jurisdictions, but they can't crack the network because the incentives aren't really there for them to do that. And it would be a very costly endeavor, which at a certain point in time would only allow them to gain temporary access to 51% of the network, and they would really only control it for 10 minutes because everyone would notice that it was a takeover, and it would quickly fork and revert back to the true network. So why would anybody waste the money of 500 supercomputers combined for just 10 minutes of being able to temporarily take over a network? So what happens when trust becomes decentralized? Because this is what we're really talking about. We're talking about value transfer without going through an intermediary. This was the significant breakthrough with Bitcoin, is you no longer needed an intermediary to be involved in your transactions. We had the original digital currencies of the 1990s, such as DigiCash, eCash. We even had some other virtual currencies like Beans and Linden dollars. All of those were centralized. So they all had a single point of failure. Sometimes you had to, for the crypto ones, you had to go back to an issuing mint, and they would verify your coins to make sure that they weren't double spent. And those were done in a centralized fashion. So they always had a single point of failure. When you can decentralize that, you fundamentally change everything in finance because you make it resilient. Bitcoin is not subject, the network of Bitcoin is not subject to being shut down. And when you have something that's resilient, it can outlive political institutions. So I'm going to play a short video here that was produced a couple years ago, but it's still very relevant for introducing Bitcoin.
What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the first decentralized digital currency. Bitcoins are digital coins you can send through the internet. Compared to other alternatives, Bitcoins have a number of advantages. Bitcoins are transferred directly from person to person via the net, without going through a bank or clearinghouse. This means that the fees are much lower, you can use them in every country, your account cannot be frozen, and there are no prerequisites or arbitrary limits. Let's look at how it works. Bitcoins are generated all over the internet by anybody running a free application called a Bitcoin miner. Mining requires a certain amount of work for each block of coins. This amount is automatically adjusted by the network such that Bitcoins are always created at a predictable and limited rate. Your Bitcoins are stored in your digital wallet, which might look familiar if you use online banking. When you transfer Bitcoins, an electronic signature is added. After a few minutes, the transaction is verified by a miner and permanently and anonymously stored in the network. The Bitcoin software is completely open source and anybody can review the code. Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing. When everyone has access to a global market, great ideas flourish. Let's look at some examples of how Bitcoins are already used today. You can purchase video games, gifts, books, servers, and alpaca socks. Several currency exchanges exist where you can trade your Bitcoins for dollars, euros, and more. Bitcoins are a great way for small businesses and freelancers to get noticed. It doesn't cost anything to start accepting them, there are no chargebacks or fees, and you'll get additional business from the Bitcoin economy. For your first Bitcoins and more information, visit weusecoins.com.
Okay, so very disruptive. If I had to describe Bitcoin in 3 words, I would say that Bitcoin is money without government. It's also, you can also think of it as file sharing for money, because the distributed peer-to-peer network operates a lot like the file sharing network. What is disruption within disruption? Well, I go to a lot of payments conferences and they're always talking about things that they're going to do to disrupt finance. Like they'll have a little silly square or a dongle that you can put on your phone. All that does is keep the existing monopoly players in charge of the payment network, because you're just processing a credit card transaction through a mobile phone. There's not really anything innovative or disruptive about that. What you get with supreme disruption is when you can introduce a new monetary unit. Introducing a new monetary unit into payments fundamentally changes the landscape, and not just on gadgets, but it allows you to do things with that currency unit that you wouldn't have been able to do with another currency unit. So it's extremely competitive, and it's extremely disruptive for the entrenched players, which is why you'll always see them and hear them trying to downplay Bitcoin. Like, oh, it's never going to be anything, it's not going to amount to anything, we still need Visa. I want to distinguish between the capital B Bitcoin network and the small b. Capital B is the larger network. So when you hear people say the Bitcoin protocol or the Bitcoin network, that's what you can compare to something like PayPal, because PayPal essentially runs a network. It's a centralized network, but it's still a network that other currencies run across. It's not an apples to apples comparison with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has a small b, which is the Bitcoin monetary unit, that only runs on that single Bitcoin network. They need each other to function. So it's not a fair comparison to PayPal, because they're only processing the national fiat currencies. With Bitcoin as a new independent monetary unit, it starts to spark currency competition with national issuers. So this is very, very important, because it's not the banks that need to worry about Bitcoin so much. Banks will always do deposits and lending. Loans aren't going to be going away. It's the central banks that have the most to worry about with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is attempting to replace their currency unit. That means that we're entering a new era. We're entering the era of decentralized banking, not centralized banking. These photos are people who are participating on that node, on that network, with various nodes on the network. The one on the left is actually using those specialized boards that I talked about, the ASICs, that are being designed and optimized in Taiwan, assembled in various places. There's a very large, successful hardware producer in Sweden. The one on the right there is most likely in his garage, and it's probably GPU processors, and he's using it to heat his home because they throw off a lot of heat. And if you don't have any cooling, then these are really an effective way to heat your home. They also use a lot of electricity. So they tend to operate in places that have reasonable low electricity costs. Their reward is currently 25 Bitcoin. So they'll receive 25 Bitcoin for finding the next single block on that ledger that is in the cloud. And every 10 minutes, there's a new block that's added to the existing block. And a block is essentially the group of aggregated transactions that occurred in the last 10 minutes. So I might have said seconds, I meant 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, the reward is currently 25 Bitcoin. In 2016, that will change to 12.5, and every 4 years it will halve. But these Bitcoin miners play a very important role in the process. And they're spread out all over the world. This is a snapshot from just one point in time. I think it was sometime in February. We sponsor this site at the foundation because we wanted this site to be available for everyone to look at the health of the network. You can see that the US is first in nodes. There was a time when China was first, but that's been flip-flopping back and forth based on the state of affairs in China. I know that we're in April now, and the Ukraine is actually number 10 on this list. At least it was yesterday. And then it's interesting that Netherlands is number 7. I think Netherlands is actually number 6 now. And this is total active nodes on the network. So this is not related at all to population. So a very, very significant Bitcoin community in the Netherlands. I'm not sure if the electricity is very cheap there, though. Okay, so what are the Bitcoin benefits for consumers? What's driving the adoption at the consumer level? I mean, why has it changed my life around? Why do I think it's going to change other lives around? First of all, it's the currency of youth. The demographics for Bitcoin are 18 to 27-year-olds, roughly. It is appealing to everyone, but if you look at where the bulge is in demographics, it's this age group. And it makes sense because it's digital, it's online, it's on the internet. This is the group of consumers that has never probably walked into a bank, and nor do they want to walk into a bank. So banks are not required. And it also provides analog equivalent rights. This is a long, complicated phrase, but what it's really referring to is the fact that as we move from the physical world to the digital world, we shouldn't give up rights that we already have in the analog physical world. So I refer to Bitcoin sometimes as digital gold, but you could just as easily refer to gold as analog Bitcoin. And analog equivalent rights allow you to retain cash-like features for your currency. So just like a paper note that we all carry around right now, there's certain things that we get from using this, and we shouldn't take it for granted, because if the world's going to a cashless society, that may not be this modern utopia that you think it is. It might turn out to be quite negative if we don't retain some of the features that we already have in the physical world. So the analog equivalent rights for something like cash are, number one, this is anonymous. I can go out and make transactions with this. Nobody knows who I am. I don't have to show them any ID or any credentials. Bitcoin on the digital cash side gives you the option of retaining that similar privacy in an online environment. So again, it's not a new secret way to be private. It's something that we already have. Another way is untraceable. This is untraceable, so it can't be linked to me where it came from or where it was spent. Even though there's a third party involved in issuing it, it's still a bearer instrument. I can give it to someone else, they have it, and I no longer have it, which means that it's an irreversible transaction. So just like cash, Bitcoin also gives you that same payment finality. And it's one of the reasons that's generating so much excitement around Bitcoin as a digital currency, because it allows you to keep those same features that you already have today with the paper cash. And most importantly, it's up to you. So you decide where you want to sit on that privacy scale. It's not, you don't have to ask for permission to have financial privacy. You can make yourself very known, and you can link your address to your identity, or you can choose to conduct your transactions in another way. All right, let's look at the merchant side. What's driving Bitcoin on the merchant side? Because introducing a new currency is always a chicken and egg situation. Do you have the users or do you have the people who accept it? It's not a bad thing that it's a chicken and egg situation. That's just the way it is. So you have to look at both sides of it, and they reinforce each other. So on the merchant side, very appealing to people who are selling in parts of the world where Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal are blocked. So there's a huge, dark, blotted out spot on the world map where the traditional payment networks just choose not to go. And they have that right. They can choose not to go into a certain country. 60+ countries are blocked out, approximately, by Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal. So that means that people who are in those countries, they're not in the global economy. They can't be global consumers unless they go out and maybe buy a prepaid card through the mail and somehow get it delivered. Well, Bitcoin allows you, as a merchant, to turn on the entire world. So you light up the map, and every single place, every single person in the world becomes a potential customer. Why would you not want that? Why would you only want to have a blacked out map and be like a crippled merchant? So very attractive for merchants on reaching the unbanked, because you need a bank to get one of those products. PayPal is licensed as a bank in a lot of jurisdictions. They operate like a bank. They can freeze your money like a bank for 6 months, and they can make you beg to get it back. Bitcoin doesn't have those problems. So you can see why this is starting to be very appealing in the developing world, especially in places like Africa, where they can skip the whole banking time period. They can go from pre-bank to Bitcoin on their mobile phone, and they never even needed to have a banking relationship. And it's not subject to payments embargo. The famous example of this was with WikiLeaks, when the US government made a request to Visa and MasterCard to just stop accepting donations to WikiLeaks. It wasn't any law or decree. It was really a couple of phone calls. And they said, no more donations to WikiLeaks. I mean, that's very offensive, that your payments can be deemed to be politically incorrect and then turned off. PayPal was also turned off with WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks continued to accept donations, and they were processing them in Bitcoin throughout all this time period. And they still are processing them in Bitcoin. There's no disallowed merchant category codes with Bitcoin. So as some of the online gambling sites learned, or as some of the adult entertainment sites learned, Visa and MasterCard, American Express can just turn you off if they don't like the category of merchant that you represent. And they do this by country. So Bitcoin doesn't have that problem of disallowing merchant category codes. It's also interesting to point out for people in technology that when PayPal went public, 70% of their merchant base was gambling sites and adult entertainment sites. So the technology seems to start there before it goes mainstream. You can eliminate chargeback and fraud risk. So as a merchant, you're not dealing with chargebacks. you have payment finality, so the transaction is irreversible. You have processing fees approaching zero. You have near immediacy of settlement, so you don't have to wait 5 days to get reimbursed from the credit card company. You receive the money in your funds, in your Bitcoin wallet at the time of the transaction. And you can obtain free publicity. I really like this one because this one was used effectively by Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic. He offered to sell 8 seats into space for the equivalent of, I think it was a €250,000 worth of Bitcoin. And he actually sold all 8 seats. So he was in the paper because of this, because he accepted Bitcoin to do that. It generated a lot of free publicity for Virgin Galactic. Overstock.com in the US did the same thing, and they compete with Amazon. Where's the aimer on that? Okay. So essentially, what we're saying with using Bitcoin is that we don't need kings to coin our money. We don't need that anymore. We're entering a different time period where we can determine ourselves what we want to use as value. And this is very liberating. It's also going to create a post-legal tender era. So the power of decentralization is going to outlive traditional political institutions. This is looking into the future. We're at 5 years now for Bitcoin. This is looking 10 years, 15 years since the original blockchain was launched. So there's going to be a monetary policy impact and a fiscal policy impact. This is what governments are going to have to deal with as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, decentralized currencies, bring us to a post-legal tender era. Starting with the monetary policy impact, there's going to be a move away from fractional issuance. So fractional reserve banking won't be possible. It won't be as easy as it is now, where the central banks and the commercial retail banks are in collusion on issuing the currency, and that's why they always have to be bailed out, because the central banks are the lender of last resort when the fractional part goes wrong. It will also lead to healthy deflation, which is another way of saying that you'll see increased purchasing power. Your money will hold its value and it won't lose its value. So just like we see with electronics, like phones and laptops, where they're accessible now by a broader community because the prices continue to go down while the quality continues to go up. So the healthy deflation will be what we experience rather than the unrestrained inflation that we have today from places like the Federal Reserve and the ECB. And finally, we'll see a reduction in the business cycles. So we won't see the boom and bust that we experience when the interest rate cycles cause the boom and bust and the expansion, the unhealthy expansion of the money supply. Interest rates will respond more to the lending activity between the lender and the borrower. So it'll be more related to the risk of the loan rather than central bank interest rate manipulation, which is the way it should be. Now, on the fiscal policy side, it gets even more interesting for governments, because they're going to have to figure out a different way to generate revenue besides taxing income. If it becomes very difficult to ascertain true income, then I predict that we'll start to see a shift to consumption-based taxes. Income won't be as easy to tax anymore because it will come from places, and it will come from places that aren't just in your borders. And it'll be stored in your wallets, your Bitcoin wallets, so it won't be subject to subpoena at a bank. You'll be in charge of where you keep your income. So then every year it won't be as easy as it is now for the taxation authorities to understand how much you made. That will have the impact of shifting taxes to the consumption side, because it's very easy to see how people spend money, and it's a lot easier to bring the merchants into the taxation than it is to try to ascertain what your individual income is. So this is probably one of the most important developments, I think, from a sustained use of Bitcoin. And there will be a check on spending. So government spending becomes constrained by actual revenue raised, which means that unpopular expenditures will be difficult to fund. If you can't print money to do what you want, you have to actually have the consent of the governed or the consent of the population who wants to spend money on a certain activity. So there's a certain government in the world that likes to print money and invade other countries and do it on debt-based financing. I won't say which government that is, but if you have a Bitcoin check on spending, you won't have that adventurism. So this is more than just a funny currency with a cute video. I mean, this has implications that go all the way to the central bank and all the way to the taxing and spending authority of the government, which is why they're a little bit scared. Some early use cases are probably instructive to point out here because we won't see the true benefits in the developed economies of the US or the EU right away. I think Bitcoin will show itself earlier in places like Argentina, Cyprus, and Kenya. So starting with Argentina, there's nobody in Argentina that really wants to hold pesos. They want to get out of pesos as fast as they can. They're experiencing massive inflation in Argentina, and as a result, Bitcoin is exploding there. It's very popular. People are meeting in cafes to exchange Bitcoin. Various places are springing up, and people are talking about it. And they're actually able to protect their wealth and their family wealth if they don't keep their money in pesos. In Cyprus, the example there is really a way to protect yourself from confiscation. Because last year, almost 1 year exactly ago from today, they woke up in Cyprus and they found out that they had like a 25%, 40% deposit tax. And what the hell is a deposit tax? I didn't sign up for a deposit tax, and I don't really want one. But still, they had to have a deposit tax, which took money out of their bank account. They immediately started looking into Bitcoin because it allows you to protect your wealth. I think that Cyprus was actually just a test case for other Eurozone countries to see if they could get away with it. Because Cyprus was a small population, they wanted to see what the fallout would be before they tried a deposit tax in places like Greece or Portugal or Spain. And then in Kenya, they're already bypassing the banking network altogether. They're using mobile money, which right now is the M-Pesa, which is operated by the phone operator there, Safaricom. Bitcoin has a lot in common with Safaricom because it allows them to operate a value transfer protocol over mobile, but it would also replace Safaricom because it's not centralized. So again, Africa has a massive opportunity with Bitcoin because there's more mobile phones in Africa than there is electricity in your home. So you're probably wondering, well, how do they charge their phones if they have more phones than electricity, homes with electricity? Well, it turns out that they have these charging stations in the village where 20 people at one time can charge their phone. And that's how they're addressing the charging problem. But just the fact that they have their mobile phone and their smartphone allows them to reach the global economy and gives them, in effect, a Bitcoin bank or a Bitcoin wallet on their phone. Which, by the way, has to be an Android right now because Apple has banned Bitcoin. Apple has banned any Bitcoin app that has a send or receive functionality. You're allowed to have a Bitcoin app on your iPhone, but only to check Bitcoin news or Bitcoin prices. If you want to do anything that is send or receive, then you have to get an Android. Apple doesn't really admit why they're doing this, but it's pretty clear from our research at least, that they intend to come out with the Apple payment system, which they see Bitcoin as being somewhat competitive to that, so they don't want to encourage it. But I would encourage you to switch to Android. Okay, also part of the post-legal tender era is how is this going to affect industries? Well, without a financial intermediary, you radically transform current industries. Retail payments are going to change. People have always had this promise of mobile, but it's never been realized because the governments and the banks and the mobile operators have all been fighting over who's going to get their part of the pie. Well, while they've been fighting, Bitcoin has actually been performing mobile transactions from consumer to merchant or person to person around the world. There was a transaction, the largest transaction ever on the Bitcoin network was $159 million last November. A single transaction, and it didn't go through SWIFT. So interbank transfers are going to go point to point. Bitcoin, in effect, at the wholesale level, can replace a SWIFT transfer. Now, they only paid $8 for that $159 million transaction, which would never be possible on SWIFT. And then lastly, asset management becomes personal. So just at the time when the Swiss banks and the Liechtenstein banks and other banks are starting to take away your financial privacy and perform financial surveillance, you now have the choice to set your own level of financial privacy by keeping your Bitcoin assets, your Bitcoin value, in a wallet. So that replaces the old paradigm of going to Switzerland and getting a Swiss bank account. So very appropriate timing. This is what one of the mobile phone apps look like right now. This is the most popular Bitcoin wallet for the Android. So you can see it has a QR code for your receiving address. It has a summary of your transactions, a history, and then it shows your balance. So very simple to use on the interface side. And as this becomes more and more popular, you'll start seeing merchants accept this as a form of payment alongside the other payment choices. The mobile payment companies don't realize this, that the solution is already here because they're stuck in the dollar world. Okay, let me go to the Okay, Bitcoin now is being spent more now than it ever has been in the past. When Bitcoin was first launched 5 years ago in January 2009, there weren't a lot of places and outlets to spend Bitcoin. So a lot of it was held for the future. It was invested, or they just didn't know what to do with it. They didn't think it would go up in value. As the years have gone by, we've seen an expansion of the Bitcoin usage. This could be probably due to the increase in merchant outlets that accept Bitcoin. It's more peer-to-peer payments. It's sending Bitcoins between different wallets. But this is a very healthy sign because it means that Bitcoin is being kept and recirculated within the Bitcoin economy. This is one of my favorite graphs because it shows how Bitcoin is advancing on other networks. You can see the average daily transaction volume right now about close to 300 million per day, which puts it above Western Union at the moment, but these things go back and forth. Back when that large transaction was going through the network last year, Bitcoin was above PayPal for a few days. This is very interesting because as Bitcoin climbs this graph and starts to pass the volume of Discover and PayPal, it starts knocking on the door of some very powerful players. What are MasterCard and American Express and Visa going to do when Bitcoin is like number 3 or 4 on this graph? I mean, what's the world going to look like? This is very, very possible because money is viral and decentralized networks have a way of expanding. Bitcoin has a currency code of all of its own. It's still pending, it's not approved yet, but ISO is the standards body that maintains currency codes like EUR, USD, GBP. Those are all maintained by a non-political organization in Switzerland. And XBT is the code for Bitcoin that was proposed. The reason it's XBT is because you have to use X as a prefix for a currency if it doesn't have a country attached to it. So the only other one is gold is XAU, and silver is XAG. And once that gets approved and formalized, you'll start seeing a whole new world for Bitcoin, because you'll start seeing the foreign exchange brokers able to include it in their dealing systems. It's also the same system that Visa and MasterCard and SWIFT and everyone uses for currencies on the network. So XBT could start to be part of an explosion in currency trading. I put up these names because they're already starting to quote Bitcoin prices and referencing XBT in anticipation of the code being approved. All right. So if you don't believe what I'm telling you today, then let's look at some quotes from the establishment. Bill Gates says that he thinks Bitcoin is a technical tour de force. Al Gore says, I think the fact that within the Bitcoin universe, an algorithm replaces the functions of government is actually pretty cool. Well, I don't really like Al Gore much, but this is probably the best thing that I think he's ever said. And then Nassim Taleb, he's the author of The Black Swan, very, very famous, popular finance book. He says Bitcoin is the beginning of something great, a currency without a government, something necessary and imperative. So very strong words from the establishment players on the future of Bitcoin. I don't want to leave you today, though, without giving you my quote, which is, Bitcoin is to legal tender as BitTorrents are to copyrights. Now just think about that for a moment, because we've all lived through the last 10 years. We know what's happened to copyrights. This is fundamental, life-changing technology. And that's how you can reach me at the foundation or on Twitter. And I want to leave some time for some questions. So thank you for your time.
All right, thanks so much. Definitely one of the more interesting topics. Do you mind taking a seat there?
Yeah, let's go.
We have a lot of questions right there. You probably got the biggest rate in the speaker list so far. All right, let's kick it off with, do you see any solution how to fix problem with energy wasting and centralizing in Bitcoin mining? Any solution how to fix the problem?
Are those two questions or one question?
One question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, with respect to the energy, there is a high cost because it is the largest distributed computing project in the world. But it's actually worth that cost. That's the price of resiliency. That's the price of survivability. If it didn't have that, and if it was done in the quote-unquote efficient way, it would create a single point of failure, which would lend itself to being shut down, as others were in the past. Also, if you're talking about energy waste, you really have to look at how much energy is wasted today with the huge data processing centers from Visa, MasterCard. I mean, they're probably wasting significantly more energy on securing their transactions in a centralized environment, whereas Bitcoin does it on the decentralized side. And then the second part of the question, can you repeat the second part of the question?
So the question one, how to fix the problem with energy wasting and centralizing in Bitcoin mining.
Okay, the problem with the centralizing of Bitcoin mining is that we may get to a point where it does start to become centralized, and the challenges in that are really to keep the mining very open and democratic. Everyone has access to the same hardware that can be used for mining, and also the size of the block. If we don't increase the size of the block so much, then more people will be able to participate, and it'll lend itself more to decentralization. So these are the things that are being debated within the Bitcoin ecosystem right now. So very, very valid questions.
Okay. There's IQ Pulse question on board. As you see, what is your relationship with Bitcoins? I didn't know anything about it before login. I have heard something. I know it well. I have bought some Bitcoins. So just vote on your mobile phones. we're going through the questions. What do you think of Tor browser websites like Silk Road, etc., where you can actually buy drugs for Bitcoin, using Bitcoin?
I think in general, anonymous markets have a role to play. The original Silk Road is not around anymore, but the technology and everything is still in place to create anonymous markets. What a lot of people don't realize about the Silk Road episode is that they actually had a lot of legal products as well as for what they were selling. They took violence out of the drug war, so the war on drugs has become something that has turned ugly and violent and has incarcerated a lot of youth. Silk Road changed all that and made the war on drugs irrelevant. The other thing that Silk Road did for good is it actually allowed people in certain parts of the world to get access to prescription medicine that would save their lives. Some of these prescription drugs they're not able to get freely in India or China or Africa, and this opened that up for them. So currency itself doesn't have a morality. Currency is morality neutral, and I don't think that you can really implicate Bitcoin in terms of what was happening on Silk Road. But there is a place for anonymous markets. I'm just not exactly sure where it is.
Okay, let's try to keep it very quick. What's going on what's going to happen when the last Bitcoin is mined out?
Okay, in 2140, when the final Bitcoin is mined, none of us will be around. But what will happen is the economics will shift from receiving the reward to receiving transaction fees. So right now the balance is about 97% reward and about 3% transaction fee. As we get closer to that date, it'll start to shift. So as the reward goes down, the transaction fees will go up. And the theory in that is that it will be sufficient to continue to protect the blockchain because everyone will have an interest in maintaining the value of Bitcoin.
Okay. What's preventing merchants to start accepting Bitcoin? For example, in Lithuania, it's not really popular. It's not there.
Well, you can go to that page I mentioned, and bitnodes.io, and you can click the whole world, so it'll show you where Lithuania ranks.
Sure. But what's stopping merchants? Is it fluctuation? What's the reason?
What's the reason between different countries?
No. What's the reason why Lithuania, for example, is not accepting Bitcoin yet? Why are some merchants going for it and the others are still waiting?
I mean, I've talked to some people in Lithuania, and it is accepted here.
A few places.
There's taxis that accept it. There's bars that accept it.
I didn't know that.
There's a very good exchange in this area called Spectra Coin.
Okay.
They might even be here today. I'm not sure. But it's probably due to the electricity cost as well, in terms of why they're not mining.
Okay. We have a question from Global Lithuanian Leaders. I was told to say the name out loud. Do you consult enterprises and governments on e-money policy? Would you like to get involved advising Lithuania as a global Lithuanian yourself?
Yeah, I'm always open to exciting Bitcoin consulting opportunities. I favor consulting with the central banks because I want to work with them on using Bitcoin as a reserve currency.
Okay, final question. What are the functions of Bitcoin Foundation in your opinion?
Yes, the Bitcoin Foundation is a nonprofit membership organization. So we have over 50% non-US members. So we're a global organization. And the three roles that we perform are, first and foremost, we maintain the Bitcoin protocol. We have the chief scientist as one of our board directors. And we also compensate some of the software developers who are working on the open source code. We want them to be able to be dedicated to it and have transparency of their compensation. The second role that we perform is the education, advocacy, and marketing around Bitcoin. So doing conferences like this is one way to fulfill that. We want to get into more countries, so we're opening up country affiliates to partner with. And lastly, we provide a global resource for legal defense. So similar to the EFF on protecting your digital rights, we want to have one place that Bitcoin businesses or individuals can feel that they can go to if they're under attack legally.
Okay, final thought in one sentence. What's the future of Bitcoin?
The future of Bitcoin is very, very bright, and it's because it's resilient. So when you see these...
One sentence.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you so much.
right.
That was Jon.
Thanks.
Thanks. There's still a lot of questions on Twitter, so you may answer them and
Okay, that's
yeah,
fine.
just
I'll be
retweet
around.
them.